This John Jones versus Israel Adesanya talk, it just will not stop. And generally in this sport, where there's smoke, there is fire. Generally in this sport, when you have two guys who match up in the ratings, wanting to fight one another, we eventually end up with that fight. It's a little bit premature for a number of reasons. I'm well aware. First off, Israel Adesanya is a middleweight. Second off, Israel Adesanya has an opponent who happens to be named Yoel Romero. Not John Jones, but John Jones also has an opponent who happens to be named Dominic Reyes, and by the way, is a light heavyweight. I mean, the whole thing's a little bit of a mess, but I can't help but study the history of the sport to tell you that when you get two juggernauts together like this that say, yeah, okay, fine, let's do it, you end up doing it. The question here becomes how, and when, and where. Adesanya, by example, who was the one calling for this fight, has recently said, that's off the plate for all of 2020. We will revisit this in 2021. It also appears that Adesanya not only has his next opponent, who was Yoel Romero, but he even has his following opponent, who is Paulo Costa, which is a huge fight that people want to see, and Costa earned that fight, and Adesanya wants to fight him. I mean, it appears to be one of these things where we go, okay, let's just take care of that business first, because that makes sense. We don't have to do anything weird here. We don't have to move guys out of divisions. We can just do everything in line, and we've got a really hot hand. Let's go ahead and play that. You then look at John Jones. We only know what's next, which is Dominic Reyes. We don't know the outcome of that match. Let's take history again into account and assume that John Jones goes out and wins that match. What happens for him after that? John has stated ever since he returned that he would like to stay very busy, and he has. John has got his way. John has been a man of his word, and he has stayed very busy. Is this his fourth fight? His fifth fight since he's been back? And only came back in right around this time a year ago. So if we're going to keep him busy, we're going to keep that in line, we do have to identify who the next contender is. It would appear just with the pieces that we have now that a good place to look would be Corey Anderson, John Blachowicz fight. That would appear as a very good place to look. The Weidman, the Rockhold, the Jacare experiment ended up getting put on hold. So now that division is trying to form the next contender. And they've got some really good options, but that's still where they're at. They're still trying to form that next contender. So for the rest of us who are trying to guess, our detective work has to be a little bit finer here because we're not able to identify something that we would generally perceive to be obvious. Now, in conjunction with all of that going on, you have the talk that John Jones wants to go up to heavyweight. I like the John at heavyweight talk. I'm into the whole thing. I like John versus Adesanya talk. I'm into the whole thing. I don't know that it's fair that John Jones be bullied up to heavyweight. Not when people that want to see him go to heavyweight want to see how well he will do and want to see a positive for John, like John going out and showcasing and showing off his skills and grabbing more hardware. The people that are bullying John Jones into trying to go up to heavyweight are people who want John to get beat. He's more than proved that there's not a light heavyweight out there that's likely for that bill. So they want to put him in a different division to get him beat. One of the narratives on John Jones, and I don't know if John takes this as big of a compliment as it should be. Everybody that seems to say that John is going to get beat will follow that by telling you how. The how is where the compliment comes because they say you need somebody heavy-handed that can knock John out. Where that becomes a huge compliment is when you have to default to putting a guy to sleep to defeat him. As the only way you're going to beat him in unarmed combat is to make him fall asleep and no longer be conscious. When that is the only thing you can default to, even in your imagination for how a guy can get stopped. That guy, John in this case, was just complimented tremendously. We have seen him fight 20 men. We've seen him wear out 20 men. We have no reason to believe that he's going to be out-wrestled. We have no reason to believe he's going to be submitted. We have no reason to believe he's going to be out-techniqued. We have no reason to believe you could drag him into the deep waters, you could get a decision, you could out-tactic him. So to hell with it. The only way you're going to beat John is to put the son of a bitch to sleep. I mean, he's getting a compliment there to the highest of levels, even by the people who are trying to pressure him into going into a division where at least there's some unknowns. I like the idea of John at heavyweight. I do. I get it. Particularly for a specific fight in this landscape, Stipe. right? If we're to assume that Daniel Cormier is going to be done after his next contest, I do strongly believe that to be true. Stipe versus Jon Jones is a lot of fun. You got two great wrestlers. You got two great strikers. Stipe a little bit more of a boxer. Jon Jones a little bit more of a kickboxer. I mean, you guys get the X's and O's. You get it. And one thing that Stipe did show is particularly in his last contest, and as good of a run as Stipe had, there is nothing that he ever did in his career that will make you respect him more than his last contest. He got his ass beat for 5 minutes against a bigger athlete, meaningfully bigger athlete. So bad position, right? You're on bottom and you're getting pummeled by a guy who's bigger than you. Oh, and happens to be a 2-time Olympian. Not a good spot. Not going to be a good night. Well, Stipe regrouped. Stipe recovered. Stipe brushed it off, and Stipe came back. There's nothing in his career, and you could put 3 or 4 or 5 fights together. 3 or 4 or 5 fights, and as amazing as they all were, will not impress you in a respect standpoint as much as one fight in the last fight that he had with Daniel. But where I think that becomes relevant is one thing that we have learned about Jon Jones is he's a tough son of a bitch. For a long time, we lived under the guise that Jon Jones was just really good. He's just really good. Get in certain positions, he's got his energy, he's feeling good out there, he's explosive, he's athletic, he's long, all these different things. Yeah, he's not going to be tough. Generally, you'd be right. It's very rare in life that an athlete is both, because an athlete doesn't need to be. You can either be the best or you can be the toughest. You can go to a world or Olympic championship on either. When you are both, that's once in a decade. That's 3 times in a generation, in a lifetime. It's extremely rare. You can cover all sports, bring all athletes into it. Very rarely in an entire decade will you meet more than one athlete in all fields combined that are both the best and the toughest. But tough is a big factor if you're going to get by Jon Jones. I agree, and I understand how people can come to the only conclusion that he's going to lose is if he falls asleep. I see how you get to that conclusion because we have no other evidence. But I do think that we're kind of dismissing some of the extremely hard shots that Jon Jones has taken, absorbed, and never even gone down. Before we're going to get a son of a bitch knocked out, we got to knock him down at some point. Jon Jones hasn't even been down, and it's not as though he hasn't been hit. He just doesn't show these weaknesses. He doesn't. I think you have seen a couple of knocks in the armor as of late, where you can get Jon out of his strategy and get him to play a different game. I think the Santos fight showed that. Jon Jones on top of Santos all day long, any way you want to do it. Jon Jones wins every moment of that contest, for sure. Jon Jones at some point decided those takedowns were too much energy or effort or didn't see the openings or whatever happened in that contest, but either way, he went away from that for 20 minutes. He then began playing a different game. Good news for Jon, he's good enough to play that game. He's good enough to go to his second strategy, plan B, and still win. I will only share with you that we have never seen Jon Jones have to play a different game before. Why he needed to play that game, I don't know. He talked about it a little bit. And he said, I just thought this was a better strategy. And I thought I was winning. I thought I was doing fine there. I don't know that I would disagree with him aside from the better part. I think Jon Jones on top is underrated. I think Jon Jones' ground and pound is underrated. And some of that is from a personal experience of being underneath Jon Jones. Finding out what a monster that guy is on top, how well he does with his hips, how long he is. That's where he really uses his length, by the way. People want to talk about Jon's reach, what is that? 89 inches, 88 inches, 83 inches, whatever it is, it's the record for the entire sport. I don't know that people know how well he uses that on top. He will use that to stretch you out. He'll use that to extend you. He'll use that to take his legs away so you can't come underneath and try to sweep him. He'll close his arm up, make his arm half as long, but then use those elbows. Jon Jones on top, I'm so impressed with him. I will share with you as he's going into this Dominic Reyes fight, I have a very open mind towards Dominic. I feel as though this is a meaningfully harder fight than the public realizes. Is it ultimately going to be a close fight? Is this ultimately are we on the verge of a Chris Weidman versus Anderson Silva-esque? No, I don't have that feeling. I have no evidence to tell you ahead of time. I don't have a crystal ball over here. That's not what I'm attempting to predict, but there was something different, and the Weidman-Anderson example is very relevant. To take you guys back, The public was having a very hard time buying into the fact that a guy named Chris Weidman from Long Island, New York was going to get the jump on the GOAT. That was just the public's perception, but the locker room believed otherwise. The locker room knew Weidman's the kryptonite. You want to keep the strap on Silva? Keep him away from Weidman. The locker room knew this. And the locker room was spreading this throughout the locker room. And the guys were very excited for this match. And the guys were trying to tell the public, hey, you don't understand. Maybe you don't know Chris Weidman. Maybe you're more familiar with Anderson. But before you part with your money, you need to understand this. Weidman beats Anderson. This was a talk in the back, but it didn't quite creep out into the public. I don't share with you that Reyes versus Jones is in that same field. I don't share with you that the boys in the back have much of a different perception than the public does, in that this is going to be an upset. This is the wrong styling, and if you want the belt around John, keep him the hell away from Dominic. That's not the talk, but I will share with you the boys in the back are a lot like me, kind of tipping their head to the side and saying, you know what? There's more questions to be answered in this fight. John has a meaningful wrestling advantage, but if we look at John's last fight where he didn't want to use the wrestling, let's just say, for example, and in this sport, we always go back to the guy's last fight. We never give the guy the benefit of having a bad night or extending through his entire body of work known as a career. We only look at the last fight. Fine. We have short-term memories. But if we were to make believe that, and John Jones doesn't plan to be wrestling heavy in terms of offense, that would mean that would really help Dominic. If that's Dominic's big deficit in this, but John doesn't plan to play that card, that will help Dominic. That has helped many other guys, none of which had helped them enough to build the bridge over the body of water known as John Jones. He's that talented. He's that good, but I'm not ready to write Reyes off. Reyes is a winner. You just can't be undefeated in this sport. Come hook or crook, any way you did it. You just can't get to be undefeated without being really good. And by the way, Reyes hasn't had to work all that hard for it. He hasn't had these long, drawn-out evenings. Only fight he had that was even scheduled for 5 rounds, he was out of there in less than 5 minutes over a former world champion. Reyes is the right guy for this job. This is a very hard fight. I do not want to stretch belief for you and tell you that it would be hard to imagine that John is going to come out on top. I'm just sharing with you. This is a well-matched contest. And Reyes being younger, Reyes being bigger, and I'm talking about by the eye, I'm not talking about by the scale. If you just look at him, Reyes is a little taller, he's got a little broader shoulders. There's something unique about this opponent for John Jones. There is something unique about getting in there with Dominic Reyes.